Hello, and welcome to the first non-Xbox episode of What Was. Now, for those of you that don't know what Was is about, to put it simply, it's a series where we cover the most infamous and famous moments within gaming history, from when those moments and events first happened or first began, to how they've been perceived throughout time, to how they're looked back at now in modern day. And for today's episode, as the title says, we're going to be looking at the PlayStation 4. So, with that all being said, let's just get into it. So in order to properly kick this video off, for the PlayStation 4 parts to make sense, we first gotta start off with the PlayStation 3 and how the state of the PlayStation 3 led to what eventually came out to be the PlayStation 4 back in 2013. So to put it simply, the PlayStation 3, starting with that, at launch it wasn't exactly the most loved system, to be perfectly honest. It was a $600 paperweight that literally no one had any use for outside of having an expensive and overpriced Blu-ray player. It also had no games whatsoever, and in general was quite a useless piece of shit. Although if you were drunk or high enough, you could possibly make some use out of it by thinking that it was a grill that you could use to make steaks on, only to then realize 5 minutes later that you're not going to be grilling anything like steaks or hot dogs. No, instead, what you're going to be grilling is what's left of your bank account after buying this console. But hey, the system had backwards compatibility for PlayStation 1 and 2 games, right? Because that's definitely worth the $600 when instead you could go hook up your PlayStation 1 or 2. Right? Yeah, no. The reason for the PlayStation 3 starting out like this, stemming from Sony's newfound cockiness and arrogance from the success of the PlayStation 2. Because when you're on top of the previous console generation, by default that means that for the next console generation, you can do no wrong whatsoever. A mistake that Microsoft would eventually make for the 8th generation, which we all know very well by now. And on top of all that, there was also the major issue of the lack of games for this console at launch, and really, for the first year or so of the console's lifespan, as well as, well, this really doesn't even have to do with the console itself. This was purely having to do with the marketing of the console. Here's one of the ads that came out for the console during its very early life cycle, or hell, even leading up to the console's release in November of 2006. Anybody remember the Babies ad? So yeah, like I said, it didn't have to do with the console itself, it's just the fact that this thing existed was enough of a turnoff for a lot of people, most likely. There was also the really crappy controller, which resembled more of a shitty PlayStation 2 knockoff controller than it did a new next-generation controller, as well as before the console even released, leaked images and concept art of a possible PlayStation 3 controller, which thankfully never saw the light of day, which resembled more of a circular dildo than it did a controller for a game console. And so, all these mistakes being made for the PlayStation 3, along with the system releasing a year after the Xbox 360, made Sony wake up and realize, oh wait, if we want people to buy our system, we need to actually give people a reason to buy it. And so came all the sorts of really good changes for the console throughout its lifespan, from the cheapened price point to actual games being released to all the updates that were coming out for it, a free online gaming service which, unlike Xbox 360, wasn't $50 a year, which eventually went to $60, as well as cool features like the brand new trophy system and the knockoff Xbox Live party chat system where you couldn't actually talk to people through microphones, instead you could only type to people while playing games. Hell, even having cool gimmicks like PlayStation Move to compete with the really also shitty Xbox Live Kinect device. Because, as we all unfortunately remember, the 7th generation of consoles had this really sad obsession with motion control gimmicky shits. This gimmick thankfully going nowhere beyond the 7th generation, with the exception of Microsoft attempting to shove it down everyone's throats with the Kinect 2.0 for the Xbox One, which, as we all know, went absolutely nowhere, which is just more proof of the fact that just because something is popular doesn't mean you should ever attempt to actually copy it. So speaking beyond the 7th generation, let's finally move on to the actual point of this video, the PlayStation 4. So leading up to the announcement of the PlayStation 4 in February 2013, like with any console, there was all sorts of leaks and rumors about it, such as how it was going to be called the PlayStation Orbis, not the PlayStation 4. Because why stick with a well-established and working brand when instead you could completely change that around for a completely dumb and pointless name, which is just more proof of how fucking stupid people can be. But eventually, once announced in February 2013 and seeing all the gameplay and whatnot about it, we finally move on to June of 2013, where we get the official reveal of the console itself, as well as completely obliterating the competition, aka Microsoft, during E3 of that year, showing Microsoft how to actually reveal a console and how to actually go about showing it off, showing just how consumer friendly they were in comparison to Microsoft, such as the $400 pricing of the console compared to the $500 Xbox One, as well as being able to properly trade games with your friends. Now, I've already showed this video before, but I'm going to show it again, so here it is.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
Also revealing that just like Microsoft was already doing with the 360, with the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Plus, they were also going to start charging you to play games online for $50 a year, in comparison to Microsoft's $60 Xbox Live subscription service, which was also eventually moved up to $60 per year in 2016 because they knew that they could get away with it, and they still are currently. And we all still pay for it because we are all total clowns. But with all that being said, we finally move on to November 15th of 2013 when the console had finally been released to everyone to finally purchase. The best two things coming out of the PlayStation 4 at launch were, for one, the Breaking My PS4 YouTube videos, which was a really cool trend by the way, and two, knack. Just knack. Thanks, Donkey. But aside from those two things, in general, the system was just a far better purchase at launch than the PlayStation 3 was, with the exception of the fact that one thing it did have in common with the PlayStation 3 at launch is that, just like the PlayStation 3 at launch, it had no games, which is something the Xbox One at launch, ironically enough, actually did well. And this was the case throughout 2014 as well, with the exception of games such as Infamous Second Son until 2015 rolled around and we finally started getting a whole lot of games for the PlayStation 4, such as The Order 1886 and Days Gone, as well as other fan favorites such as Knack 2. It also had some pretty forgettable, mediocre titles such as Bloodborne, God of War, Marvel's Spider-Man, or at the very least in comparison to a gem like Days Gone, those games are pretty forgettable and mediocre. I mean, why would you want to play a game as Spider-Man or play as a literal God of War when instead you could play a open-world zombie survival game, which is very unique and never done before, right? I mean, come on. You know I'm right, let's just be real here. But aside from eventually having actual games to play, the system also had all sorts of cool features introduced at launch, as well as introduced throughout brand new updates for the system, such as being able to join up in party chat, which is something you could already do on Xbox 360 the last generation. It also eventually introduced backwards compatibility, something that was already there as a basic feature with previous PlayStation consoles. Except unlike previous PlayStation consoles where you could simply take a PS1 or 2 disc and insert it into your PS3, with the PS4, instead you had to fork over $15 for an old game like San Andreas. But see, that's okay because San Andreas on PS4 is the exact same game, sure, but not only does it have trophies, but it's also in HD now, so that's okay. That's a perfectly great deal for a game that's over a decade old. And finally, my all-time favorite PlayStation feature is finally having the ability to change your name on PSN. That's just absolutely mind-blowing. I don't know any other platform that you could do that on. Get Xbox Live and Steam out of here. They don't count, okay? They don't exist in PlayStation world. So as far as I'm concerned, this is innovation at its finest. Thank you, Sony. I love you. But see, that was my favorite feature. Easily, the community's favorite feature is Sony finally caving into crossplay after like 2 years of begging for it ever since Fortnite blew up back in 2017. You know, that cool thing that you could do where people could play games on different systems together, which has been possible since like 2005, 6, 7. It was finally implemented. Finally! Isn't that cool? Something that basic that the other platforms had already been doing for a while, although to be fair, Microsoft was being a total headass about it too throughout the 7th gen when Sony offered, so I guess they're even. So, regardless, it's cool that crossplay is now a thing, although if Sony tries going back in that for the 9th gen with the PS5, then they're gonna be in a world of shit. So, Sony, don't go back in it. You probably won't, but still, don't go back in it. For your own sake. Thank you. But obviously, when it comes to all these features that were implemented throughout time, of course they were going to be met with both positive and negative reception for various different reasons. But easily the one thing that received the most amount of mixed reception from the community was the existence of the PS4 Pro. Similar to how the Xbox One would eventually have the Xbox One X, both of which being, as everyone knows by now, mid-gen refreshes, more powerful versions of the base versions of those consoles. But see, what made these mid-gen refreshes different from previous generations of consoles where all you'd get was nothing more than more storage space and a slightly refined version of how the console looked, with these mid-gen refreshes you'd get full-on upgrades with all sorts of more powerful hardware. Basically, the PS4 Pro was a PS4 Pro 0.5, and the Xbox One X being an Xbox One 0.8. But when it comes to the look of consoles and all that, not just the PS4 Pro, just the PS4 as a whole, what really makes the PS4 stand out from the Xbox One is just how shit all these special editions of the console are, such as the God of War skin. Look at how trash this thing is. God, that's just awful. But one thing about the PS4 that isn't so awful is the not so awful, but instead pretty damn good looking list of games that are left for the PS4 before the PS5 launches next November. Games like Death Stranding, Last of Us 2, Ghost of Tsushima, aka probably a PS5 launch title. And as we slowly begin approaching the PS5 hype train and slowly begin saying goodbye to the PS4, I think it's pretty safe to say that a lot of people, while they don't think it's as good as the PS2 era was, they do look back on the PS4 as a pretty great time when it comes to gaming. Definitely better than the PS3, no doubt. And the PS4, starting as a pretty decent console, at least in my opinion, has ended up, in the end, a pretty damn good one with the library of games, including the $15 backwards compatibility for San Andreas on PS2. But thankfully, it won't be the case for the PS5, considering it's actually going to have backwards compatibility at launch, similar to how the Xbox One has been doing it for about 4 years now, which is pretty much what applies to any console generation before this one, so it's not anything too special, but at least it's there, right? So yeah, free backwards compatibility for the PS5 is something to look forward to, and speaking more on the PS5, we're probably going to get that official announcement for the console in February 2020, similar to how things were done for the PS4 back in February 2013. Then eventually, we get to E3 2020, and that's what we see what both Microsoft and Sony have in store for all of us. Hopefully, we'll have a great start to the 9th generation of consoles in 2020. I mean, it'd be a pretty great way to start off the next decade. And hopefully things are also going well at Sony right now, because there's been talks about how things are going a little poor there right now, and the situation could be a bit better, so let's just hope for the best that things are okay at Sony and it doesn't affect the launch of the PS5. And so, that's what the PS4 was. A console that started off with humble beginnings by learning from the mistakes of the PS3 to, in the end, has now been a very well-received system that's looked back upon fondly with a very good library of games, as well as also selling over 100 million units, so congrats to Sony on that, and the system will probably sell another 15 or so million because of the hype of the PS5, and hopefully the success of the PS4 doesn't cause Sony to become arrogant asshats again like with the PS3. Hopefully, that taught them that they should never try out the PS3 ever again, aka $600 grill. And yeah, that's it. That's the video. That's what the PS4 was, once again. And yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this on social media, and speaking of social media, make sure to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook if you're 60 years old, and maybe support the Patreon if you're interested enough. And that's it. That's all I had to say, and again, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you all next time, but until then, I'm out. Peace.